tariffs that you're planning. So you're expecting to hit something like 10 to 15 countries, is that right?
No. Essentially, all of the countries that we're talking about, we wouldn't be talking about all countries. It's not a cutoff. And if you look at the history and you look at what's happened to us, you go to certain places, go to Asia, and you take a look at every single country in Asia, what they've done to the United States in trade.
All right, so there you have it. That was President Trump on the airplane. Anyway, joining us now to talk about all this, Wilbur Ross, my very, very dear friend and former Secretary of Commerce on the trade team during the first term. Wilbur, thank you for coming on. So you heard Mr. Trump say he wants all the countries to be impacted by the trade policy. If you were back in your old post, Wilbur Ross, what might you recommend?
Well, I think if you put one tariff on everybody, that would level the playing field and would not encourage transshipment from high tariff places to low tariff ones. My concern is there are already some tariffs on some places at different levels, so I hope he'll smooth it out and make it so that there's no incentive for a high tariff country to transship through low tariffs, because these people are very imaginative, and if there's any kind of a loophole, they will find it.
What happens? I mean, let's take it. You've got the possibility of a universal baseline tariff. There's a number that surfaced over the weekend, $600 billion. That would roughly mean we have roughly $3 trillion plus in imports of goods at a 20% rate. That's $600 billion a year. That's the universal tariff. Then there's the reciprocity tariff policy, which I particularly favor. They charge us, we charge them. But if they charge us lower, then we can charge lower. I think a lot of people understand that perfectly well. But then there's the specific sectoral ones. As you know, President's already put 25% tariff on automobiles, steel and aluminum. He's talking about pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. So in that universe, I think I've covered it all. What would you say?
Well, what I think is what I said before. It's not good to have it varying by product, by country, because that will encourage bad behavior. What could work would be if you selected the 4 or 5 major categories that are almost half of our imports anyway, and put a special tariff on every country for each of those, counting whatever tariffs were already there. Then you would have something that would be unlikely to leave a loophole for high tariff people to transship through low tariff. That's the big worry I have. If you don't have everything symmetrical, they'll find a way to cherry pick it and defeat the purpose.
Well, what would those products be, more or less? I assume automobiles would be one.
Well, automobiles, auto parts is a separate one. Electronics, electronic data processing, surprisingly hydrocarbons, although a lot of that just comes here to be refined and goes back out. But those are a few of the big ones. And they add up to a lot. That's hundreds of billions of dollars.
Okay, so does that give him enough room to negotiate? For example, President said the other day the automobiles would be permanent at least through his 4-year term. At one point, he said he wanted to make them permanent. In other words, I liked reciprocity because I think it would cover a lot of ground, and I think that it would give him maximum flexibility. You and I know he's a master negotiator, okay? And sometimes negotiators, the trade, military, foreign policy, it's hard to know where one stops and the other one starts, which is okay because he's awfully good at it. So I thought reciprocity might be the best one. You're saying product specific. That's really different.
Well, no, but reciprocity needs to be on specific items in that they don't charge us the same tariff on all their items. The so-called blended rate is a composite of some that are lower and some that are higher. So it doesn't accomplish true reciprocity unless you recognize that fact and unless you recognize that whatever the product is that's coming in from wherever, it needs the same overall tariff. Otherwise, I promise you, they will find ways to cherry pick.
No, I get that. What to do about USMCA, Mexico and Canada? What would you recommend now?
Well, I think there are a lot of things needed. First of all, Mexico has not really lived up to their commitments in the USMCA. Among other things, they were supposed to open up their hydrocarbon sector, which is notoriously inefficient, and let U.S. companies in. They really haven't done that to any meaningful degree. So there are some things like that. In the case of Canada, there are also some particular items that they haven't dealt with. But the big thing is we need new rules of origin for parts, particularly in the automotive sector. What was put in USMCA was 60 to 70% of the parts had to be from a country where average minimum wage was at least $15 an hour. That was meant to spread the benefits of relocation between us and Mexico. Well, now there are a whole lot of different parts. The ratios are not the same, and especially in electric vehicles, the parts are quite different. So that needs to be revisited in any event. Plus, there are some diplomatic objectives that I'm sure the president will have in mind. For example, NATO. Canada is a NATO member, but it has the lowest percent of GDP of any country in NATO going to defense. That doesn't make any sense. We still have never gotten comfort for the dairy products abuses that Canada has, and there's still some issues about the softwood lumber that's used in home building. So there are a bunch of industry-specific issues in each case.
Wilbur, last one. I'm kind of hoping that he gives a speech. Okay, so Wednesday is Liberation Day, quote unquote. I'd like to see him. I mean, the world trading system's been broken for decades, as you and I both know. Unfair trading left and right, as you and I both know. The United States has been on the short end of the stick, as you and I both know. This thing has to be changed. So whatever strategies and details the president finally decides on, I would love for him to give a speech, could be from the Oval Office or wherever he chooses, and just explain to the American public why he is doing this in very clear terms. I think clarity would end a certain amount of confusion, and I would think would make the American public rest easier.
I think clarity and simplicity both go together, and both are very, very important. But you mentioned WTO. You realize, of course, that none of these things that he's doing are WTO compliant. And I believe that WTO has long ago outlived its usefulness in its present form. It's very one-sided against us. More trade cases have been brought against the U.S. than against any other country, 25% of the total. And 90% of the time, the WTO panels voted against us. So you would have to believe that U.S. is really wildly violating all the rules every day, and yet has a big trade deficit.
Well,
that whole thing needs to be rethought.
It's true. It's all nonsense. We ought to defund them. I think the president wants to defund the WTO anyway. Wilbur Ross, former Secretary of Commerce, thank you. Appreciate your views very, very much.